He left her for not being good enough. Years later, he sees her again, and what she's become leaves him in shock. Annie had always thought of herself as an ordinary woman with simple dreams. She grew up in a modest neighborhood, working hard to make her way through college while taking care of her younger sister after their parents passed away. She didn't seek luxury or glamour. She valued kindness, family, and the feeling of stability in a world that often felt unpredictable. Then she met Daniel. Handsome, polished, and from a wealthy background, Daniel seemed to embody everything she'd never dared to imagine for herself. He swept her off her feet with his charm, the soft way he listened to her dreams, and the way he made her feel seen in a world that rarely paused to notice her. For Annie, their relationship felt like a fairy tale, something too good to be true. Daniel shared his dreams with her too. He talked of his ambitions, his pressure to succeed, and his hopes of making a name for himself, though he didn't lack much in life. She was always there to reassure him, to remind him of his talents, and to support him through every insecurity. He thrived with her by his side. Yet, even though he often told her how much she mattered, Annie noticed a certain shift in him recently, a vague impatience or frustration he hadn't shown before. One evening, when he took her hand and told her he wanted her by his side, no matter what, she believed it completely. They stood together under a quiet evening sky, and in the glow of that moment, she felt secure in their love. But as the months passed, subtle changes in his behavior unsettled her. There were dinners with his friends where he seemed distant, polite, but somehow absent. Little by little, Annie began to wonder if she was enough for him and if perhaps he needed someone more polished, more comfortable in his world. The first time Annie noticed Daniel's discomfort openly was at an elegant dinner with his friends. They were at a high-end restaurant with chandeliers gleaming overhead, waiters in crisp white jackets, and a menu filled with dishes she couldn't pronounce. As Daniel's friends laughed over their latest travels and the artwork they were adding to their homes, she felt herself fading into the background, unsure of what to contribute. It was subtle at first, the way his friends' glances lingered on her simple dress or the way they exchanged faint smirks when she mentioned her family's modest background. But Daniel's expressions were harder to ignore. Every now and then, he'd glance at her and shift uncomfortably in his seat, his hand tightening around his wine glass as if it were a lifeline. A forced smile would briefly cross his face, but his eyes held something she hadn't seen before, embarrassment or perhaps doubt. Then one of his old college buddies leaned forward and, with a laugh that sounded half-mocking, asked if Annie ever got tired of working so much. Daniel looked down, visibly tense. When she glanced at him, he avoided her eyes, only managing a small nod. She could tell he was silently pleading for her not to respond. After the dinner, they walked to her door in silence. Daniel's hand felt loose in hers, as though he was barely holding on. She searched his face, hoping he'd reassure her, but he simply glanced down at her with an almost apologetic smile. "It's been a long day," he muttered, giving her a quick kiss on the cheek before turning and walking away without looking back. Closing the door, Annie's heart felt heavy with confusion and a growing ache. She wanted to shake off her discomfort, but memories of the way he used to look at her, a look that once held only admiration, came rushing back. In those early days, he would hold her hand proudly, introducing her to everyone as if she were the only person in the room who mattered. Where had that Daniel gone? For the first time, she wondered if their love was as strong as she'd believed, or if perhaps, like everything else in his life, she too was just another accessory. Something to be evaluated, judged, and replaced if it didn't quite measure up. As the weeks went on, Daniel grew increasingly distant. Annie could feel him slipping away, like trying to hold water in her hands. The warm glances he once gave her now felt cold, and their conversations, which used to stretch late into the night, now barely lasted beyond dinner. He was always busy, his phone constantly lighting up with messages from his business associates and social invitations from his friends. One evening, Daniel invited Annie to a party at one of his friends' penthouses downtown. She took extra care to look her best, wearing the dress Daniel had once said brought out her eyes. But as they entered the vast glamorous space filled with designer-clad guests and sparkling champagne, she immediately felt out of place. Daniel barely noticed her discomfort, quickly falling into easy conversation with his friends. Annie smiled politely, but each passing comment or glance from the crowd around her seemed to intensify her self-consciousness. At one point, she overheard two women whispering near the balcony. "Is that Daniel's girlfriend?" one said, eyeing her with a slight smirk. "She doesn't seem to fit his style." The words pierced through Annie, her cheeks burning. When she looked for Daniel, she found him deep in conversation with a beautiful woman in an elegant silk dress, one that seemed to flow as easily as her laughter. Annie saw the way Daniel's eyes lingered on the woman's face, and a pang of hurt settled in her chest. For the first time, she felt like a stranger beside him. Later that night, as they drove home in silence, Daniel's hand lay on the steering wheel, his expression unreadable. When they pulled up to her apartment, Annie could no longer hold back her emotions. She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Daniel, are you embarrassed by me?" He looked at her, caught off guard, and then sighed deeply, as if the weight of his own insecurities had finally caught up with him. "It's not that, Annie. Sometimes I feel like we're from two different worlds. My friends, they don't understand us. I don't even know if I do." His words cut through her, each one feeling like a rejection. Before she could respond, he leaned forward and gave her a quick, almost mechanical kiss on the forehead before whispering, "Good night." And with that, he was gone, leaving her in the dark with her heart pounding and a hollow feeling of dread. A week after that painful night, Daniel called her, his tone strangely flat. "We need to talk," he said, as if the words were rehearsed. Annie's heart sank. She knew what was coming but hoped against hope that she was wrong. They met at a quiet cafe in the city. Daniel sat across from her, his gaze drifting as he tapped his fingers against his coffee cup. She could see the tension in his eyes, the hesitation. But before he spoke, she found herself blurting out, "Daniel, if I'm not enough, just tell me." He looked at her, surprised, then finally spoke. "It's not about you, Annie. You're an amazing person, and you deserve someone who can appreciate you. I just think that maybe we want different things." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "I need someone who fits better into my world. Someone who takes care of herself the way." His voice trailed off, as if realizing the harshness of his words, but it was too late. Annie felt her heart shatter, the weight of his words pressing down on her. It was as if every insecurity, every self-doubt, had just been validated by the one person she trusted most. Swallowing back tears, she forced herself to look at him, wanting to keep her dignity intact. "I thought you wanted me, not my appearance or my lifestyle. But maybe I was wrong." Daniel's face softened with regret, but he said nothing, confirming her fears. She stood up, the chair scraping the floor, and with a trembling voice, she said, "Goodbye, Daniel. I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked away, tears blurred her vision, each step a painful reminder of the love she'd lost and the humiliation she felt. But as she reached the street, her heart heavy yet resilient, she whispered to herself, "One day, he'll see who I really am." That night, Annie lay awake in bed, her mind replaying every painful word, every distant look from Daniel. She felt hollow, as if he had taken a piece of her with him, leaving her feeling like a shadow of the woman she once was. But underneath the sadness, something else began to stir, a quiet, fierce resolve. She realized that her life, her worth, didn't have to be defined by anyone's standards but her own. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, she stood in front of her mirror, her reflection looking back with tired eyes but a spark of determination. "This ends now," she whispered to herself. "No more feeling small, no more hiding." It was the first time in her life that she felt a sense of clarity. She promised herself that she would not only move on from Daniel, but she would also become someone she was proud of, a woman who could stand on her own, without anyone's approval. With a newfound determination, Annie started making a list of goals. She wrote down everything she'd ever wanted for herself but had put aside: a stable career, a healthier lifestyle, and a chance to pursue her own dreams without compromise. Each item on the list felt like a small but necessary step toward the life she knew she deserved. From that day forward, Annie decided she would invest in herself, physically, mentally, and emotionally. She could feel the weight of her pain fueling her desire for change. She wasn't doing this to prove herself to Daniel or anyone else. She was doing it for herself, for the version of her who had been waiting to emerge. With a clear purpose, Annie threw herself into her transformation. Her first goal was to strengthen her career. She signed up for night classes, eager to learn new skills and network with professionals who shared her ambitions. She stayed up late studying, finding herself captivated by each new subject. As she worked and learned, she realized that the confidence she had once tied to Daniel's validation could come from within. In the mornings, she went for long runs, feeling the weight of her insecurities slowly fade with each step. She pushed herself, determined to feel strong physically as well as mentally. Each mile she ran felt like a release, as if she were shedding the hurt Daniel had left behind. Gradually, her confidence began to grow. She joined seminars and attended networking events where she met people who were ambitious, driven, and, most importantly, genuine. In these new circles, Annie discovered a side of herself she had never known. A woman unafraid to speak up, to share her ideas, to claim her space in the room. And though it was a slow process, each small victory felt like a testament to her promise. Through late nights, hard work, and a dedication she hadn't realized she possessed, Annie found herself becoming the woman she'd once dreamed of. As she built her new life, she began to see her worth more clearly. She no longer needed anyone to tell her that she was valuable. She felt it with every step she took forward. Annie could sense that this journey was only beginning, and though she had miles to go, she knew one thing for certain: she was never going to look back. Years passed, and Annie's commitment to her goals only grew stronger. She worked tirelessly to excel in her career, putting in long hours and gaining the respect of her peers. Her journey wasn't easy. There were moments when exhaustion crept in, times when she questioned if she was truly capable of reaching her dreams. But each time doubt surfaced, she remembered that promise she'd made to herself. That memory fueled her every step forward. In her field, she quickly made a name for herself as a determined and innovative thinker. She began leading projects, mentoring newcomers, and speaking at industry conferences. Annie's confidence grew, but it wasn't just about her career. She had invested in every area of her life: her health, her friendships, and most importantly, her sense of self-worth. The woman she had become felt far removed from the person who had once wondered if she was good enough for someone else's world. People began to take notice. Former colleagues sought her advice, and business leaders invited her to panels, asking her to share her journey of growth and resilience. Annie spoke with grace and honesty, sharing her story without mentioning names or heartbreak. She wanted people to know the power of finding one's worth from within. Little by little, Annie had become a figure of inspiration, a woman who had transformed her life on her own terms. For the first time, she felt truly free. As Annie's success continued to soar, she decided it was time to start something of her own. Drawing from the years of experience she'd accumulated, she launched a consulting firm that specialized in guiding new businesses and aspiring entrepreneurs. Her firm quickly gained traction, attracting a range of clients who admired her transparency, expertise, and work ethic. Soon, Annie's name began to appear in industry publications. Articles celebrated her rise as a woman who had overcome numerous challenges to build a thriving business. She was even invited to share her insights on popular podcasts and television segments. Annie found herself in the unfamiliar spotlight, her story inspiring those who were striving to achieve their own dreams. One afternoon, she received a call from a well-known journalist who wanted to do a feature on her journey, not just as a professional, but as a woman who had risen above personal setbacks. After the interview, the journalist smiled and said, "Your story will inspire a lot of people, Annie. Not everyone has the courage to rebuild the way you have." As she walked out of the interview, Annie felt a wave of gratitude and strength. She realized that her success was no longer just a personal victory. It was a symbol of resilience and self-worth. She had become exactly who she had set out to be, a woman who had defined herself on her own terms. A few weeks later, Annie's feature was published, and her story quickly gained attention. Headlines described her as a self-made success, a woman of strength and determination who had built her empire from nothing. Her transformation captivated readers, many of whom were inspired to follow her path. But there was one reader whose reaction was far from inspiring. Daniel, sitting in his office late one night, came across the article purely by accident. He had been scrolling through business news, looking for updates to help with his own struggling ventures. And then he saw her. Annie's photograph appeared on his screen, her name bold in the headline, and below it, a caption that read, "From humble beginnings to CEO, a journey of resilience." He clicked on the article in disbelief. The photo showed her standing confidently, poised, her eyes filled with the determination he hadn't noticed years before. As he read her story, details of her life that he hadn't known or perhaps hadn't cared enough to understand, he felt an uneasy mixture of shock, regret, and admiration. This was the woman he had dismissed so easily. She had become everything he once claimed to want and more. For the first time, Daniel felt the weight of what he had lost. Since their breakup, Daniel's life had not gone as he'd planned. The friends he once tried so hard to impress had slowly drifted away, and his business ventures, fueled more by status than purpose, had begun to crumble. Each failed deal, each rejection, reminded him of the confidence he once had when Annie was by his side. Now, as he sat alone in his empty apartment, scrolling through social media and reliving memories of the life he'd lost, he felt the weight of his choices settling heavily on him. Seeing Annie's story brought a rush of regret, a gnawing feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake. He remembered her kindness, her quiet strength, the way she always believed in him when others hadn't. He'd dismissed her as not enough back then, but now, seeing her success, he realized just how wrong he'd been. Daniel knew he had to try to reconnect, even if just to apologize. Maybe, he thought, she'd listen. Maybe he could make her understand what had been going on in his mind back then. Fueled by regret and a sense of desperation, he found himself reaching for his phone and typing a message to her. He hesitated, then sent a simple, tentative text. "Annie, it's been a while. I'd love to catch up if you're free sometime." He waited, watching his phone, but there was no reply. Days passed, and Daniel's message went unanswered. But the regret only grew. He thought back to moments he'd shared with Annie, to the small things he had once taken for granted. The way she would wait up late to listen to his plans, the encouraging words she would whisper when he felt uncertain, and the warmth of her presence beside him. These memories haunted him, filling him with a longing he could no longer ignore. Then, one evening, as he scrolled through social media, he noticed that Annie would be speaking at a public event downtown. He hesitated, debating whether to go. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he needed to see her, needed to witness, in person, the woman she had become. The day of the event arrived, and Daniel dressed carefully, hoping he'd make a good impression. He arrived early, feeling strangely nervous. When Annie finally walked onto the stage, the audience's applause was immediate and thunderous. She looked poised, confident, a commanding presence. Daniel felt an intense pang of regret, realizing just how blind he had been. As she spoke, he hung onto every word. She shared her journey with the audience, talking about the challenges she had faced, her doubts, and the strength she had discovered within herself. She spoke of resilience, of learning to value herself beyond anyone else's approval. And though she never mentioned him, he felt the weight of her story as if each word were meant for him alone. When the event ended, he approached her, his heart racing. She looked surprised to see him but remained calm, her expression unreadable. Standing face to face with her, Daniel was momentarily lost for words. She looked at him with a quiet strength he didn't remember, her eyes reflecting none of the vulnerability he had once known. Finally, he managed to speak. "Annie, I saw the article, and I had to see you. I wanted to tell you how proud I am. You've become incredible." Annie held his gaze, her expression steady. "Thank you, Daniel," she replied simply, her tone polite but distant. He swallowed, feeling the gulf between them. "I wanted to apologize for everything. I made a huge mistake, Annie. I didn't see who you were, and I didn't appreciate you. I was wrong." Annie nodded, her face softening slightly. "Daniel, I understand. But the truth is, my life didn't turn around because of you, or even in spite of you. It changed because I learned to value myself. What I have now, I built on my own." The calm certainty in her voice left him feeling both humbled and defeated. He realized, painfully, that the connection they once shared was gone. She had moved on, far beyond the person he once knew. Trying to keep a smile, Annie added, "I hope you find the same for yourself one day, Daniel." Her words, though kind, carried a finality that left him with a deep sense of loss. As Annie turned to greet others at the event, Daniel stood there, feeling the full weight of his choices. She had become everything he had once dreamed of, but she no longer needed him. She had outgrown him, leaving him to face the emptiness he had created. After the event, Daniel couldn't get Annie out of his mind. Every word she spoke on stage, every confident glance she shared with the audience, brought a fresh wave of regret. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend, he'd lost the chance to be a part of her growth, to witness her become someone extraordinary. Alone in his apartment, he remembered moments that once felt ordinary. The late nights she supported him through his anxieties, her encouraging words, her steady presence. He had taken all of that for granted, letting go of someone he now realized was irreplaceable. As he sat with his thoughts, Daniel began to confront his choices. The friends he once admired now felt shallow and distant. He could see clearly how his obsession with status and social approval had driven him away from the one person who saw beyond those things. Annie had become someone extraordinary, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she found value in herself. Daniel envied that, realizing how far he was from finding that same depth within himself. He knew there was no way to change the past or undo his mistakes. All he could do was live with the weight of his choices. With each passing day, he felt the impact of what he had lost growing stronger, a life lesson that would stay with him, reshaping his view of love, ambition, and self-worth. For Annie, seeing Daniel again had been a test she passed with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed external validation. Hearing his apology, she realized something crucial. Her life had changed entirely, but not because of him or anyone else. Her transformation had been a deeply personal journey, a process of finding strength in her own identity, free from the need to meet anyone else's standards. That version of herself who had once needed Daniel's approval was long gone. As she walked away from their conversation, Annie felt a lightness that surprised her. Memories of the pain she had felt after their breakup now felt distant, like a chapter in a story she had outgrown. She didn't feel anger or regret. Instead, there was a sense of closure. Daniel's apology, though sincere, had come too late, and in truth, she didn't need it. Her success and her self-worth had come from within, built on her own determination, resilience, and the promise she'd made to herself. Reflecting on her journey, Annie saw how each step had brought her closer to this version of herself, a woman who knew her own value, who had achieved success on her own terms. In that moment, she felt immense pride, not in how far she had come to prove anything to anyone, but in how she had come to truly respect and value herself. As she returned to her life, Annie was certain of one thing. She would continue to grow, to lead, and to inspire others. Her strength was her own, and she carried it forward, unburdened by the past and ready for all that lay ahead. In the days that followed his encounter with Annie, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that clung to him. He replayed her words, her calm expression, the undeniable strength she had radiated. He thought of everything he had missed by dismissing her worth, lost in the chase for status and approval. The regret weighed heavily on him. One night, alone in his apartment, he remembered a moment long ago that now seemed so far away. They had been sitting on her couch after a long day, and she had stayed up just to listen to him talk about his goals. She'd smiled, her eyes warm with encouragement, and told him, "I believe in you, Daniel." At the time, he'd barely acknowledged it, brushing off her words as something he'd deserved. But now, he realized how deeply she had cared and how foolishly he had thrown it away. Those words haunted him as he began to reflect on his life. Slowly, he pulled away from his old social circle, the people who had once seemed so important. He no longer found comfort in hollow talk about status or wealth. In his heart, he felt a responsibility to reshape his life, to find a purpose that wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. While he could never go back, he knew he could at least try to honor the strength Annie had shown by discovering a version of himself he could truly respect. As Annie returned to her life, the brief encounter with Daniel quickly faded from her mind. Her days were now filled with purpose, running her company, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and connecting with the community that had come to admire her journey. She felt proud of how far she had come, knowing her story had transformed from one of heartbreak to one of strength. After speaking at a conference for women in business, she lingered to answer questions. A young woman approached her, clutching a notebook. "Ms. Clark," she said shyly, "thank you. I never thought I could do this, but hearing your story made me believe that maybe I can." Annie smiled, her heart swelling with pride and empathy. She recognized the uncertainty in the young woman's eyes, a look she once knew all too well. "Believe me, you can," she replied gently. "Never let anyone define your worth, because it's yours to claim. You'll be amazed at what you can achieve once you trust in yourself." As she watched the young woman walk away with newfound confidence, Annie felt a deep sense of peace. She had become the woman she had once needed, a symbol of resilience, of self-worth, and of courage. Her journey had come full circle, from a story of overcoming pain to a legacy of inspiration. And with every new day, she knew her life would continue to be defined by her own strength. With his past mistakes pressing on him, Daniel took his first real steps toward change. He sold his luxurious apartment, trading it for a smaller place closer to the city, away from the constant reminders of his old life. He spent more time alone, confronting the habits and attitudes that had shaped his superficial pursuits. It was painful, but he knew he couldn't run from it any longer. To start over, Daniel enrolled in a local business mentorship program, not as a mentor but as a mentee. He wanted to learn about building relationships on genuine terms, something he realized he'd never truly valued before. In sessions, he listened to others who had gone through difficult experiences, people who had lost much more than he had and yet found ways to rebuild with integrity. Their resilience humbled him, and as the months passed, Daniel began to understand the strength Annie had found within herself. Though he still thought of her from time to time, it was different now. He no longer wanted her forgiveness or validation. Instead, he hoped that, one day, he could become someone worthy of respect, someone who lived by the strength of his own character. Each small step brought him closer to that goal, and slowly, he started to feel a sense of peace he had never known before. As Annie continued her journey, her influence grew beyond her expectations. Her story of resilience, now well known, became a beacon for young professionals and entrepreneurs alike. People admired her for her success, but even more for her unwavering authenticity and her dedication to empowering others. She was frequently invited to speak at conferences and seminars, where she shared insights from her journey and the strength she found in self-belief. One afternoon, she received a letter from a young woman who had attended one of her talks. The letter spoke of gratitude, of how Annie's story had given her the courage to pursue her own dreams despite feeling lost. Annie read the words slowly, her heart swelling with pride. She remembered how far she had come and how, years ago, she had once needed to hear those very words herself. Knowing she had become a role model was a gift in itself, but it also reinforced her purpose. Her legacy was no longer just about success, it was about encouraging others to find their strength, to value themselves, and to build lives that felt truly fulfilling. She knew her journey wasn't over, but as she stood at the height of her achievements, she felt ready for whatever the future held, certain that she would face it with resilience and unwavering self-worth. Years passed, and life continued for both Annie and Daniel in ways neither could have predicted. One evening, at a charity event in the city, Annie was mingling among a crowd of business leaders when she felt someone watching her. Turning, she saw Daniel standing at a distance, a small, respectful nod acknowledging her presence. He looked different, older, calmer, his gaze less intense but somehow more genuine. As he approached, Annie noticed a warmth and humility in his expression that she hadn't seen before. They exchanged a polite greeting, and for a moment, it was as if time had erased the hurt between them. "Annie," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I just wanted to say, thank you. Seeing who you became pushed me to become better. I know I can never undo the past, but I'm grateful for everything I learned because of you." Annie smiled, nodding. She sensed the sincerity in his words and was quietly moved by his transformation. There was no lingering sadness or regret. Instead, she felt a gentle peace, as if she had finally come full circle. A mentee of Annie's, a young woman named Sarah, walked up just then, her face lighting up as she recognized her mentor. "Ms. Clark, I'm so glad I caught you. That advice you gave me last week? It changed everything for me," she said with a bright smile. Daniel watched the interaction, observing how Sarah looked up to Annie with admiration, much as he had years before. But Annie had become a source of wisdom, a person who left people better than she found them. Seeing this, he understood just how much she had grown, and how much he still had to learn. "It's good to see you, Daniel. I'm glad you found your path," Annie said gently before turning back to her mentee. With that, they parted ways, both feeling a quiet sense of closure that left them free to move forward, each with a newfound appreciation for the strength that had shaped their lives. As the years continued to unfold, Annie's legacy grew, reaching far beyond her immediate circle. She became a celebrated mentor, her life story shared across books, conferences, and media, each platform amplifying her message of resilience and self-worth. Her influence wasn't just limited to those who worked with her. It touched countless people who heard her story. But her deepest satisfaction came from mentoring young women who were starting their own journeys. She had become the person she once needed, and each life she touched was a reminder of how far she had come. Reflecting on her journey, Annie knew that her life was her own, shaped not by the heartbreaks or mistakes of the past, but by the strength she found within herself. Her journey was proof that a person's worth is not defined by who walks away, but by who they become afterward. She hoped her story would inspire others to realize their own value, to live free from the weight of anyone else's approval. As for Daniel, he continued his own path quietly, using the lessons he learned to shape a life of greater integrity and meaning. He often thought back to his moments with Annie, her words still echoing as a reminder of the depth he once dismissed. Her courage had awakened something in him, a desire to live a life that truly mattered. Though they would never be a part of each other's lives again, he held on to the inspiration Annie had left him, carrying her strength as a reminder of the man he wanted to become. In the end, both had found peace and purpose in their own ways. Their story, once filled with pain and regret, had transformed into something greater, a testament to the power of self-worth, resilience, and the ability to rise above even the deepest heartbreak. Thank you so much for watching until the end. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of resilience and self-worth. If you enjoyed this journey, please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and see how this story resonated with you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with friends who might need a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful and uplifting stories. We have many more inspiring journeys to share with you, so stay tuned.